For most of human history, memories were fragile. Moments lived and then lost, surviving only through stories, drawings, or fading recollections. Before photography, capturing reality required skill, time, and interpretation. Painters decided what mattered. Artists chose what would be remembered. The world could not be frozen in an instant. That limitation shaped how humanity understood truth, history, and evidence itself. The invention of photography changed that forever. It did not simply create images. It reshaped memory, journalism, science, warfare, law, and identity. And no company would come to dominate this new power more completely than Kodak. To understand how Kodak would later destroy itself, one must first understand how completely it once controlled the world of photography. In the early 19th century, photography was complex, expensive, and inaccessible. The earliest photographic processes required bulky equipment, long exposure times, toxic chemicals, and deep technical knowledge. Photography was not a consumer activity. It belonged to laboratories, scientists, and wealthy enthusiasts. For the average person, capturing an image was simply impossible. That reality began to change with one man, George Eastman. George Eastman was not a scientist in the traditional sense. He was a businessman with a sharp understanding of markets, simplicity, and scale. Where others focused on improving image quality or chemical processes, Eastman focused on accessibility. His insight was simple but powerful: photography would only truly change the world if ordinary people could use it. In the 1870s and 1880s, Eastman worked obsessively on simplifying photographic processes. He introduced dry plates that replaced wet plate photography, eliminating the need for photographers to prepare chemicals on the spot. This was a critical step, but it was only the beginning. Eastman's real breakthrough came with roll film. Instead of individual glass plates, Eastman developed flexible photographic film that could be rolled, stored, and transported easily. This innovation drastically reduced cost, weight, and complexity. More importantly, it enabled a new type of camera, one designed not for professionals, but for everyone. In 1888, Eastman introduced the Kodak camera to the public. It came preloaded with film for 100 exposures. There were no settings to adjust, no chemicals to handle, no technical skills required. When the roll was finished, users simply sent the entire camera back to Kodak. The company would develop the film, print the photos, reload the camera, and return it. Kodak's slogan captured the philosophy perfectly: you press the button, we do the rest. This was not just a product. It was a system. Kodak did not merely sell cameras. It controlled the film, the processing, the chemicals, the paper, and the printing. Customers did not own the photographic process. Kodak did. This vertical integration would become the foundation of Kodak's power. As photography grew in popularity, Kodak scaled rapidly. Its factories expanded. Its distribution network spread globally. Its patents protected its processes. Its brand became synonymous with photography itself. To take a photograph was to take a Kodak. By the early 20th century, Kodak was not just a company. It was an institution. Kodak cameras documented family memories, scientific discoveries, colonial expeditions, wars, and revolutions. Journalists relied on Kodak film. Governments relied on Kodak imaging. Scientists used Kodak materials in laboratories. Hollywood used Kodak film stock to record movies. Even espionage and military reconnaissance depended on Kodak technology. This ubiquity created something extremely rare in corporate history: total market dependence. Kodak's business model was deceptively simple. Cameras were often sold at low margins, sometimes even at a loss. The real profit came from film. Every photograph required film. Every roll needed development. And Kodak controlled both. This model was extraordinarily profitable. Film sales were recurring. They were predictable. And they were addictive. The more people photographed their lives, the more film they consumed. By the mid-20th century, Kodak dominated approximately 90% of the film market in the United States and a significant share worldwide. Its profits were immense. Its influence was unquestioned. Its leadership believed, with good reason, that photography would always depend on film. This belief would become fatal. Internally, Kodak developed a powerful corporate culture built around chemical engineering. The company employed thousands of chemists, materials scientists, and process engineers. Its research laboratories were world-class. Its patents were vast. Its institutional knowledge was deep. But Kodak did not see itself as an imaging company. It saw itself as a film company. This distinction matters. Because film was not just a product. It was Kodak's identity. Every department, every incentive structure, every executive promotion was tied to film profitability. Innovation was encouraged, as long as it strengthened the film ecosystem. Anything that threatened film was seen not as progress, but as danger. And yet, the seeds of Kodak's destruction were already forming, inside its own laboratories. Long before the digital revolution reached consumers, Kodak scientists were exploring ways to capture images without film. Not because they wanted to eliminate film, but because they wanted to improve it. Early electronic imaging research was seen as experimental, theoretical, and distant from commercial reality. In the 1960s and early 1970s, advances in semiconductors, sensors, and computing power began to suggest something radical. Images could be captured electronically, stored as data, and displayed without chemical processing. To many engineers, this was fascinating. To many executives, it was irrelevant. Kodak's leadership believed that even if electronic imaging became possible, it would never match the quality, resolution, or emotional appeal of film. They believed consumers loved prints. They believed physical photos mattered. They believed digital images would remain niche tools for scientists and governments. They were partially correct, at first. But the most important moment in Kodak's history did not happen in a boardroom or a marketing meeting. It happened quietly, in 1975, inside a Kodak laboratory, when a young engineer named Steven Sasson built something extraordinary. He built the first digital camera. At the time, Sasson's invention was crude by modern standards. It was large, heavy, and slow. It used a CCD image sensor. It captured black and white images at extremely low resolution. It stored data on a cassette tape. It took over 20 seconds to record a single image. But it worked. For the first time in history, a camera captured an image without film. When Sasson demonstrated the device to Kodak executives, their reaction was cautious, confused, and ultimately dismissive. They asked questions not about its potential, but about its threat. Where is the film? How would we make money? Why would anyone want to view photos on a screen? Sasson himself later recalled being told to keep the invention quiet. Not because it was unimportant, but because it was too important. Kodak now stood at a crossroads it did not yet understand. It possessed the invention that would redefine photography for the next century. It owned the patents. It employed the engineers. It had the manufacturing power, the brand trust, and the global reach to dominate digital imaging just as it had dominated film. But embracing digital photography would mean destroying its own core business. And Kodak was not ready to do that. At this moment in history, Kodak was at the absolute peak of its power. Its profits were enormous. Its market share was secure. Its leadership was confident. There was no external pressure forcing change. No competitor appeared capable of threatening its dominance. From the outside, Kodak looked invincible. From the inside, a war had quietly begun, not against another company, but against the future itself. And in the next part of this story, that internal conflict would grow into one of the most catastrophic strategic failures in corporate history. When Steven Sasson built the first digital camera in 1975, Kodak did not see it as a beginning. It saw it as a problem. The invention did not fit within Kodak's economic logic, its organizational structure, or its understanding of consumer behavior. Most importantly, it threatened the product that generated the vast majority of the company's profits, film. Kodak's executives were not ignorant. They understood the implications of digital imaging at a technical level. They recognized that if image sensors improved, storage became cheaper, and computers more powerful, photography could eventually become instantaneous, reusable, and essentially free after the initial hardware purchase. That future was dangerous to a company whose revenue depended on selling consumables. The problem was not that Kodak failed to invent digital photography. The problem was that Kodak understood it too early. Inside Kodak, digital technology was treated as a long-term research curiosity rather than a strategic priority. Engineers were allowed to experiment, publish papers, and file patents, but they were discouraged from developing consumer products that could threaten film sales. The technology was real, but it was not welcome. This created a strange paradox. Kodak became one of the world's largest holders of digital imaging patents while simultaneously refusing to commercialize digital cameras in any serious way. The company protected the future legally, while suppressing it commercially. Throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, Kodak continued to improve digital imaging internally. Its research labs refined sensors, image processing techniques, color reproduction algorithms, and storage methods. Many foundational technologies used in modern digital cameras were either invented or perfected inside Kodak. But these innovations were rarely allowed to leave the laboratory. Kodak's internal strategy was built on delay. Executives believed that digital photography would not be viable for consumers for decades. They believed film would continue to dominate through incremental improvements, better color accuracy, finer grain, higher ISO performance, and faster processing. And for a time, this strategy appeared to work. Film quality improved dramatically. Kodak introduced iconic products like Kodachrome, Tri-X, and Portrait. Professional photographers trusted Kodak. Hollywood relied on Kodak film stock for motion pictures. Amateurs continued to buy point-and-shoot cameras and disposable film cameras in massive numbers. The money kept flowing. This success reinforced Kodak's internal bias. Why disrupt a business that was printing money? Why replace a proven system with an untested one? Why rush into a future that seemed inferior to the present? But while Kodak was delaying, the rest of the world was catching up. Electronics companies, not bound by a chemical legacy, saw digital imaging as an opportunity rather than a threat. Companies in Japan, particularly Sony, Canon, and Nikon, began investing heavily in electronic sensors, digital storage, and consumer electronics. Sony made one of the first significant moves in 1981 with the Mavica, an electronic still camera that recorded images onto magnetic discs. While it was not fully digital by modern standards, it represented a critical shift. Photography was moving toward electronics, not chemistry. Kodak responded cautiously, licensing some technology, collaborating selectively, but avoiding direct confrontation with its own business model. Instead of leading the digital revolution, Kodak attempted to control it from the sidelines through patents and partnerships. This approach created another fatal illusion, that Kodak could slow the future down. The company believed that by holding key patents, it could dictate the pace of digital adoption. It assumed competitors would need Kodak's permission to enter the market meaningfully. But technology does not evolve in a straight line. Engineers find alternatives. Patents expire. Innovation routes around obstacles. As digital cameras slowly improved in the 1990s, Kodak faced a growing internal contradiction. Consumer interest in digital imaging was increasing. Computers were becoming household devices. The internet was emerging. The idea of instantly viewing and sharing photos began to resonate. Kodak could see the trend. Market research showed it clearly. But the company could not reconcile digital growth with film survival. Instead of committing fully to digital, Kodak attempted a hybrid strategy. It released early digital cameras, but priced them high, marketed them poorly, and limited their capabilities. These products often felt like obligations rather than ambitions. Internally, digital teams lacked power. They did not control budgets or long-term strategy. Film divisions remained dominant, both politically and financially. Innovation that threatened film margins was quietly deprioritized. This was not accidental sabotage. It was structural inertia. Kodak's executives were promoted based on film performance. Their bonuses were tied to film revenue. Their careers depended on protecting the core business. Asking them to kill film was asking them to erase their own success. Meanwhile, competitors faced no such conflict. By the late 1990s, Japanese manufacturers were releasing increasingly capable digital cameras. Image quality improved. Costs dropped. Storage expanded. Consumers began experimenting with digital photography not because it was perfect, but because it was convenient. No film to buy. No development delays. No wasted shots. Each digital camera sold represented not just a lost film sale, but a permanent break from Kodak's ecosystem. Kodak tried to respond. It invested billions into digital infrastructure. It acquired companies. It launched online photo services. It attempted to reinvent itself as a digital imaging company. But these moves came with hesitation, internal resistance, and conflicting priorities. Kodak was fighting on two fronts, trying to protect film while chasing digital. And in doing so, it satisfied neither. By the early 2000s, digital photography crossed a critical threshold. It became good enough. For most consumers, digital images no longer needed to match film perfectly. They needed to be fast, easy, and shareable. At that moment, Kodak's greatest advantage, its film dominance, became its greatest weakness. The company had spent decades optimizing a system that the world no longer needed. Even worse, Kodak had spent decades teaching consumers to love photography. It had succeeded too well. Because once people loved taking photos, they were ready to take them without film. And in the final part of this story, the consequences of Kodak's choices would become unavoidable. The patents that once promised control would become weapons used by others. The company that invented the digital camera would watch as the digital age destroyed it. By the time Kodak fully understood the scale of the digital revolution, it was already too late. The shift was no longer theoretical. It was no longer distant. It was visible in consumer behavior, market data, and collapsing film sales. Photography had crossed the point of no return. For decades, Kodak had believed that digital photography would arrive slowly, giving the company time to adapt. Instead, it arrived in waves, first as a novelty, then as a convenience, and finally as a necessity. Once consumers experienced the freedom of digital images, there was no reason to go back. The impact on Kodak's core business was devastating. Film sales, once the foundation of the company's profits, began to decline sharply. Photo processing labs closed. Retail partnerships dissolved. Entire segments of Kodak's ecosystem vanished within a few years. The recurring revenue model that had sustained the company for nearly a century collapsed. Kodak attempted to accelerate its digital transformation, but the company faced a problem that money alone could not solve. It did not lack technology. It did not lack patents. It lacked coherence. Internally, Kodak was fragmented. Different divisions pursued competing strategies. Some pushed for aggressive digital expansion. Others continued to defend film products, believing that niche markets would preserve profitability. This internal conflict slowed decision-making and diluted execution. At the same time, competitors surged ahead. Canon and Nikon leveraged their expertise in optics and electronics to dominate the digital camera market. Sony advanced sensor technology. Apple and other smartphone manufacturers transformed cameras into software-driven tools embedded in everyday devices. Photography was no longer about cameras alone. It was about ecosystems, platforms, and connectivity. Kodak struggled to redefine itself in this new landscape. One of Kodak's most ironic strategies was its increasing reliance on patents, the very tools it once believed would protect its future. The company held thousands of digital imaging patents, many of which were foundational. As revenue from products declined, Kodak began to monetize its intellectual property through licensing and litigation. For a time, this strategy generated significant income. Kodak sued competitors. It negotiated settlements. It collected licensing fees. But patents could not replace a functioning business model. They provided cash, not relevance. The market continued to move forward without Kodak. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of Kodak's fall is that it was not caused by incompetence or ignorance. Kodak understood digital photography better than almost anyone. It had invented it. It had refined it. It had predicted its potential. What Kodak could not do was accept the cost of its own success. To fully embrace digital photography in the 1980s or early 1990s would have required Kodak to deliberately destroy its film business while it was still profitable. It would have required executives to sacrifice short-term revenue, personal incentives, and institutional identity for a future that was uncertain. That is a decision very few organizations in history have ever been able to make. In 2012, Eastman Kodak Company filed for bankruptcy protection. The name that had once defined photography became a symbol of corporate failure. Factories closed. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. A century of dominance ended quietly. Steven Sasson, the engineer who invented the digital camera, watched as the technology he created reshaped the world, largely without the company that had built it. His invention did not fail. It succeeded completely. It was Kodak that failed to follow it. The story of Kodak is not a warning about technology. It is a warning about fear. Fear of disruption. Fear of loss. Fear of change. Kodak believed that controlling the present was more important than creating the future. And in doing so, it allowed others to take the future instead. Today, photography is everywhere. Billions of images are captured every day. Moments are shared instantly across the globe. The barrier between memory and reality has nearly disappeared. This world exists because someone inside Kodak dared to imagine photography without film. And it exists because Kodak chose not to. The camera war was never fought against competitors. It was fought inside the company itself, between what Kodak was and what it needed to become. And that is the most dangerous war any organization can fight.